Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Generalist, where security practitioners look beyond niches, silos, egos, and hopefully can build their competence and credibility. My name is Ilya Umanskiyis. Well, it's a great privilege to have this conversation with my colleague, my friend, and also a host on the same platform of his own very respectable show, Michael Gips. And the way Mike and I met, it was through a long distance connection. I was in Hong Kong and he was in Virginia or somewhere around there. And we were discussing how to improve ASIS during his tenure as the chief learning officer for that organization. But I will stop here and I will let Mike introduce himself. Mike, very heartfelt welcome to you and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Ilya. The pleasure is really mine. You reminded me of how we met, and I remember you have a very straightforward approach. And I forget how it went, but either there was a post on social media or a direct message, and you were very, I wouldn't say confrontational, but you had some very direct criticisms about ASS and I believe how they selected presentations and speakers. And they were well taken. And I was taken a little back because you were very direct. And I said, I like this guy. He's really cut. He doesn't take any, he doesn't take the party line. And I thought this is someone I could work with from the inside to try to, help and sort of frame the issues a little bit differently and get some different speakers on and people who didn't parrot the corporate line. So yes, I remember that well, and that drew me to you. So it's a pleasure to be on this show. As a matter of fact, as you mentioned, I have my own show called Global Insights in Professional Security. And in a sense, I modeled it on yours because you're the generalist. And I consider myself a jack of all trades, master of none. So I like to get into different areas. My show kind of covers the intersection between security and big themes like law, media, leadership, business, law enforcement. So thank you for providing me the inspiration for my own show.
My pleasure. I didn't know that, but so it's very, I guess, humbling to hear how you described how you started your show. I really appreciate it. I would like to echo what you said about the directness with which I approached our first conversation. I think it probably went, how shall I say, I could have been a friendly, how people typically are, but I think what I've learned from you and what I've been learning from a lot of practitioners is that our industry is evolving and it's growing, and we are observers, right? And so at the time, I think, and I continue to kind of see this, and you hear it in some of my shows. At the time, I was feeling this frustration because I know we can be better. I am absolutely convinced, and I think that now. We've been talking much more, and we've been interacting and kind of sharing content and making introductions for one another. It's really been about this belief that our industry can improve, and it has a lot of growth to cover. And every year, as we observe it, as we share it with our audiences or with our peer groups, that's something that stuck with me. And I appreciate that you took our first conversation so well that you didn't just hang up on me. But it was a lot of stuff that I've observed in Asia that I needed to share with you. And I really appreciate the way in which you received it. And you're one of the few people actually that have been modeling to other people to say, emulate this this approach to our industry, right? You believe in the fact that it can be better, but you don't stop looking for problems to solve. You don't stop by looking for challenges, and you don't stop highlighting those challenges. And I think that that's what I'm picking up from you every time that I listen to your show, every time that I hear you appearing on somebody else's show or in your writing. So I'm very grateful that you found the time. And why don't we take a step back, if I may, because a lot of people recognize you for the work you do today, for what contributions you've provided to ASIS. Can you give me a little bit of a background on like how you came to ASIS? What is your background before it, and kind of what inspired you to join our industry?
Sure. And it's a little bit of a winding path, so bear with me. I'll try to make it quick. I graduated from college as a history and Spanish major. And I thought, what can you do with history and Spanish? Well, I don't know. Why don't I go to law school? Mm-hmm. So I went to law school. Yeah, I get a lot of groans when I tell people that, but I haven't really practiced law for a long time. So I got out of law school, and what I liked to do, I immediately became a clerk for the New Jersey Supreme Court, going over death penalty cases. And so everything I did was death penalty. And when I got into the private sector, that only lasted a year, I started taking on pro bono cases like death penalty cases. But I also was drawn to workplace issues, workplace violence, harassment, discrimination. And at the same time, I like to write. So I started writing for local newspapers on local issues, but they tended to be around crime, copyright issues and things like that. And I thought, you know what, I like this better than practicing law. So let me write about, these workplace issues, and where can I write about that? And it just so happens I found an advertisement in the newspaper for a job at ASIS, writing for and editing for Security Management magazine. And I did that, and I got that job, and I got promoted to senior editor, and I did that till for 13 years. And then I got asked to create a CSO roundtable, it was called at the time. It's now the CSO Center for Leadership and Development. And that was taking the highest level folks or in the hierarchy at ASIS from global organizations and creating a new membership for them with their own benefits, with their own governance structure, with their own content. So I built that up over the years. I did that for a few years. We got up to 400 members. Then I was asked to take over publishing. I did that. And then when we got a new CEO on board, I was asked to take back the CSO, keep publishing, take on education, standards and guidelines, certification. And I did that for a few years until I thought, okay, it's time to go out on my own. And now I do a lot of consulting for CSOs. I help with brand awareness for security startups and security manufacturers and providers. I try to help with thought leadership, participate in these sorts of things to move the security industry in the right direction. And for example, yesterday, I was on another OSPA webinar with Martin Gill talking. Yesterday I was listening to it. Tomorrow I'm going to be on one on travel risk management. And I was on one with you just a couple of weeks ago on ESRM. So I like to be engaged and help drive where the industry is going. And I realize that, as you pointed out, that I'm open, that I could be part of the problem in some ways. I worked for ASIS and, I did things a certain way. And I'm like, I think certifications are good and blah, blah, blah. I try to keep an open mind. So even though I go on a lot of these shows, I write a lot of things, I'm always listening to other people because there's some good opinions out there. There are a lot of people who know a lot more than I do. So, I try to adjust and just keep on top of things and listen to people like you.
You actually just answered one of the latter questions or topics in our conversation is what if I could kind of do a macro overview of what you just shared with myself and the audience. It seems as though you are already a consummate generalist who has taken a lot of different projects, a lot of different initiatives, and shaped them in the same, I guess at the same time, kind of leading the way for teams of people to actually embrace certain things, and for our peers in the industry, people who have been long-standing members of SIS, and also people who are either kind of less active in the SIS to start paying more attention, and for people who are not familiar with the SIS to get a better awareness of where the industry is going, what's going on. I really appreciate that you've been able to really deliver those things. And this is a fantastic message for young and aspiring practitioners. Just kind of what your story is fascinating because you didn't say the two typical words, law enforcement and military, right?
Right.
I'm very grateful that I get to learn from you because I came up in the ranks in the industry, also not having served in military or law enforcement, and having been brought into the industry pretty much by chance. But the person took a chance on me and helped me kind of grow and get involved in a variety of things. So I really appreciate that you shared it with me and those who are tuning in. Let me dive in, and I want to, I guess, start with the topic that I understand is very close to your heart, what you've been following, aside from various other things you're involved in. You shared with me when we were discussing how we were going to go about recording this and putting it out, that something that you are following very closely is the effects or developments in social media and the threat of social media to organizations and individuals. I am very connected to that topic, perhaps for different reasons, but I'd love to learn more about what are some of the key issues that you're picking up on. And I'd love to get in and maybe share with you some of those things that I'm hearing, and because it is a big concern, obviously, as a parent, for one, but also how organizations and practitioners in our industry and those whom we advise need to be looking at social media. So why don't you kick us off and share your ideas?
Great. I'd love to have this discussion. And as you mentioned, yes, this is very close to my heart. There are a lot of issues out there right now. I mean, there's ransomware, all sorts of cyber attacks, workplace violence, terrorism is always a big deal. Fraud is an insider threat, also close to my heart. But what really gets me about social media, and it's really disinformation and competing information at, in the larger scope of things, that has me worried for our society. The United States, Western society, really the whole world, because we can't even agree on basic facts. We have counter narratives for everything. And I'm not trying to lay blame one side of the political spectrum or the other. It comes from both sides of the political spectrum. Sometimes it comes from the middle. It comes from anyone with an agenda, really. And say, oh, okay, well, it's coming from people who believe the U.S. vote, electoral vote, was falsified or was fraudulent. Or no, it's coming from cancel culture. Well, those are all part of sort of a bigger malaise that we can't agree on a common set of facts. And how it concerns me in the security world specifically is, now you make great points about, yes, raising a child and eroding our societal core. But as far as security and corporate security, look what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. You had people call it an insurrection, call it a riot. Whatever happened, it led to deaths of people. It led to a breach of the bastion of American democracy, something that we thought couldn't happen, something that hadn't happened since the War of 1812. And you had people wearing their name badges in there, people, smashing in windows with American flag poles, and who worked for companies that, you and I, do business with or have employers. So you know, springs readily to mind this place, a lawyer for a place called Goosehead Insurance in Texas was part of that gang. There was someone from Navistar Direct Marketing in Maryland who was wearing their badge. This is really, really bad publicity for these companies. It and I know there are a million other broader issues, but when you look at it through the corporate spectrum, this is the kind of thing that brings dishonor, disrepute, scandal upon an organization. Not only hurts their reputation and brand, but it hurts the bottom line. I'll give you an example of, and this wasn't done by anyone in, as far as I know, from in the Capitol riots, but the role of disinformation. Wayfair is a kind of upper level, high end brand of cabinets, and I wasn't really. I kind of was mildly aware of it, and apparently they name their cabinets sort of like IKEA names their furniture after people's names. So all the cabinets had, I think, girls' names. And someone tweeted, I believe it was a tweet, that they have girls' names because that's the name of the girl that's kept in the cabinet, and it's a child trafficking ring. And that got out there and it exploded. And Wayfair, the CEO, got mentioned, he was normally mentioned 100 times a month or something in social media, and it increased by something thousands factor, and they were mostly negative, mostly really negative. Employees were getting doxxed, so their information was being put on the internet. They were trying to short the stock of Wayfair. This kind of, these kind of ridiculous claims that anyone could put out there, they go viral. And years ago, like they tried to do with P&G, that their logo was devil worshippers, and that sort of got a little ground, in the underground, people whisper campaign, but nothing like going to millions, tens of hundreds of millions of people in the span of, a couple of hours. So that's the sort of thing, and that sort of thing undermining overall trust in institutions. With and you can stop me if I sound like I'm going on a tangent, but
please don't.
With the way you look at what happened in the United States with the presidential campaign and the voting, a lot of people now say, "Wow, who can I trust?" Even people people on both sides don't trust government, right? Mm-hmm. So if you back Trump, you don't trust the deep state. If you oppose Trump, you back Biden or whatever, you oppose what Trump, the kind of seizure of power he made, So people are saying, well, who do we trust? What kind of institutions can we trust? Well, we don't really trust the media. Can we trust corporations? Well, can you trust social media? Already they're selling our information. There are campaigns against Facebook. And so who do we believe in? Well, established brands. So now established brands have the most to lose. We take them down. Of course, there are other pillars of society. There's military, there's law enforcement, but even those are scathed now or damaged because of, at least in the United States, because of the George Floyd protests and the calls to defund police. Mm-hmm. So I see institutions toppling, and who are you going to look up to? And disinformation is just eroding all these institutions right in front of our eyes.
Thank you for bringing this up, and it's very brave of you, to be honest with you, because I've had people who just like, despite our friendships or cordial relationships, whatever, they just kind of said, well, you know what, I don't want to get into this topic, right? Because it really, once we begin these conversations, especially if those conversations then hit social media channels like LinkedIn and elsewhere where our stuff is posted, you have people who have, I think, a lot of emotions that are attached to these issues. One thing that I've been very, very grateful for is people like yourself, people like my friend Sean Ahrens and a few others who could be on a different side of a political spectrum than, let's say, myself, my family, and so on. But it hasn't stopped us from having a civil conversation. And I feel this concern. As I said to you, like, I'm a parent, my son is 16, my daughter is 11. And I feel like I wish that the world that they inherit, that they go into as adults, has that degree of comfortable civility remaining in it, so that they can have good, meaningful, deeper conversations with their friends, regardless of what their political affiliations or beliefs may be. Because we can't achieve, I think, we can come up with solutions to many, many problems and challenges that we're facing if we don't have those meaningful conversations. And I feel also, and let me know what you think about this, kind of how you observe what's going on around us with the January 6th riot and various other events that either preceded it or happened afterwards. It seems as though, along with trust, what seems to be on a decline is our general ability to look for nuances and factual nuances in the stream of information that is beating our heads, our brains, or is attacking our brains at any hour, at any minute outside of the time when we're asleep. And I find that we've moved on past where we were concerned about notifications on our phones, on our mobile devices, or on our computers. I feel as though we have become these shallow consumers of information. And because it's shallow, we're making our judgments based on information that we have not properly assessed. We haven't slowed down to think about who is saying things to us, what is the agenda, whether this information is rooted in fact, and because of it, I see that any conversation, and I'm very glad that we're not having one of those conversations. Most conversations, unfortunately, fall apart. They stop being conversations and they turn into yelling matches because just by virtue of upping your temperature and by trying to out yell the other person, that's also a form of, let's say, of an argument, but it doesn't lead us down the right path. It doesn't allow for us to settle on compromises. It doesn't allow for us to model positive behaviors to the next generation, and it doesn't lead us to agreement that is rooted in facts, right? And I feel like we're way past what Kathleen Conaway called alternative facts. I don't think that phrase matters anymore because it's just so fast, and it's how did they say it at the Center for Humane Technology? It's kind of downgrading humans. So this is what I've been seeing as well. So I share your concern. I just want to touch on this point of how it relates to our industry. In addition to what you said, is I feel that we are also susceptible to becoming tribal. And we are also susceptible to looking to the group of people with whom we're affiliated for years, right? And sticking with them because it's much easier for us humans to be associated with our tribe and feed off of our tribe and to agree with our tribe, right? And I feel that also is causing this, how shall I say, probably slightly more civilized, but a conflict and a disagreement nonetheless, where somebody's opposing view is shut down very quickly simply because the rest of the tribe doesn't agree with it, right? Or the rest of the tribe doesn't even want to hear this, doesn't want to entertain it because the view is coming from someone who's viewed as an outsider, right? I kind of see that taking place as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, that was a very eloquent description of very intelligent and intellectual analysis of the situation, and I agree. As far as tribalism, we all belong to tribes, right? We all belong to our family tribe. We belong to, if we have a religion, our country, if we live in a state or a province, a neighborhood. And yes, there are certain things that sort of we cling to either for a sense of belonging or because of culture or habit or family. But you got to look at least I do. You have to look closely at who's in your tribe, who you sharing your tribe with. Um, are you sharing it with people who are calling for, the hanging of the vice president? Are you calling for people who want law enforcement to be completely defunded and have no police on the streets? Um, are you, so before you hook up with a tribe, and I mean, it's like, even my family, I'm very loyal to, but my family can do things that are wrong. I disagree with my family and my family members a lot, but it doesn't mean I don't love them and respect them. It's, you got to challenge the people in your own tribe and say, do you really believe that? And if they're open-minded, they know you're sort of the same group, or you feel the same way, or you're tied into in a similar manner. You've got to get to the people who will actually have open minds and listen and do it from within. I've never seen anyone, come out, and there was somebody I was just reading on LinkedIn. Somebody was really going hard on. There was a Time magazine article that said that the whole election was rigged in the sense that all these liberal institutions like social media, like Facebook and news media and other groups, sort of hit America with a disinformation campaign to say how bad Trump was and whatever. And whether you believe it or not, I mean, there was a stream of anger going on. And if somebody had written, "No, you're wrong," and here's the logical argument why, and I'm not saying one way or the other, but that would have gotten nowhere. Have you ever seen an argument that was settled by an adversarial situation on Facebook or Twitter? I mean, people just dig in, dig in, dig in. And I think that the responsibility is for fair-minded people who, can keep an open mind, who sort of have a softer, lighter touch, who can be persuasive, to work within their tribes and say, look, let's be reasonable. It's why, I have respect for people in Congress who work with people on the other side of the aisle. Those people these days are despised. When people like Ben Sass works with, and I know I'm getting into U.S. politics and it's a global show, so I'm sorry. He's a senator from Nebraska who sort of voted with the Democrats. I highly respect that. I highly respect when Democrats cross over and work with the Republicans. People think that they're cowardly or pusillanimous, but those are the people who are showing real courage, because they may be going up against their constituencies. They're pushing back against a tremendous amount of pressure that says, vote along the party line. And believe me, they're getting a lot of pressure. So to me, the hope to work against tribalism is enlightened people like you and other folks who are moderate. They're thinking people. They can look at the nuances of facts. Not everything is, when you said we've gone beyond alternative facts, we're now into alternative realities. Yeah. There are ecosystems here, and it's like you can't get in, and there's no room for compromise. We've got to puncture those ecosystems, and I wish I were smart enough to tell you, lay out a plan for that, because we'd be going in the wrong direction. But I mean, it starts with people like you and conversations like this, I believe.
There are two things I'll add here. I think it's been said so many times by people far smarter than I am, and I'm a big consumer of just people who are prudent thinkers, and they may come from the tech sector, they may be philosophers, they may be journalists. I actually like consuming a lot of stuff, and the fact that you have been in journalism and a writer is also very rewarding for me. I don't get to actually spend a whole lot of time with people like yourself. This is very useful for me. So I have heard on multiple occasions that people connected the social media component with the fact that much of social media is present on platforms which by virtue of algorithms or by virtue of the way they're set up by their designers, they thrive because of ever increasing level of conflict in the content that they are providing. And the more conflicting the content, the more agitating it is, the more eyes you're likely to get on that content. And obviously that drives revenue from advertisement and so on. And I feel like we as a community, those who are responsible for advising people on risk management, um, this is one of the challenges and also one of the opportunities for us to step up and to advise, like to your point about organizations and individuals and how our industry is actually in the middle of this um, epic challenge, right? We are actually there to be that prudent voice, to help organizations who, by virtue of the way they're set up, they have multiple minds working there. People from all walks of life, from with various political affiliations, with various views about the world, right? They have a tremendous challenge today to maintain that level of trust and to de-escalate and to mediate camaraderie and solutions to joint problems. Because what people forget when their temperature is up, right, is that actually people like Yuval Noah Harari and various other thinkers, Sam Harris, and people in scientific community, people in the legal community, and people, you know, in the academia, they've been saying for years that with our temperatures high and amped up by social media that's thriving on conflict content, we're forgetting that we have universally shared challenges ahead of us and that we're witnessing all over, right? It doesn't have to be in New York, it could be in Dhaka, or it doesn't have to be in Hong Kong, it could be in Perth, in Australia, right? And because we are subject to this barrage of content that is distracting us, that is downgrading our attention, or it's actually harvesting our attention, but by at the same time, it's downgrading our ability to look for facts and nuances, we're losing that opportunity to address much bigger issues. And we, in our industry, I think, this is one of the opportunities for us to step up to the plate and to help organizations and individuals whom we advise to parse through that noise, right? I know a lot of threat management programs have been successful and set up, and there's a lot of analytical power that many organizations are building. But I think it goes beyond that. I think it really it goes to the senior leadership in organizations, those that are in the role of CISO or CSO, who need to be that voice of reason, not just within their lane, but just the voice of reason in terms of kind of how to protect the organization from these mushrooming clouds of discontent, of people being hijacked by yesterday's news or by today's stream of tweets and so on. The other thing I'll add here is I think that what we are witnessing now, especially in the last maybe 2-3 years, and particularly in 2020, because of the pandemic, we have multiple challenges. People don't realize that, you know, when they think about it, everybody thinks we're in a pandemic. We have a ton of other things going on, right? It's all very complex. And what I find is, I don't know to what degree the pace at which tech is growing and at which these platforms are creating larger domains of influence, how we can carefully, both as just individuals, but also as practitioners, to what extent we're building a good acumen to counter this growth of and barrage of negativity, barrage of non-factual, conflict-provoking information. I don't know to what degree, I'm comfortable thinking about the next 10 years. I don't know what I can tell my kids about positive, stories that may develop, positive developments that may happen in the next 10 years relative to what we're witnessing now with social media and the threat that it creates. Let me ask you, so you also, as you're observing all these things, may I just wonder, what are some of the solutions you're observing now? Like, what do you see happening both in our industry, among our peers, and maybe outside, as you have a much broader remit, just by virtue of your consulting work and your writing and just how you view many different industries and issues? Where do you see some solutions to this social media threat to organizations and individuals arising from? Like, who is leading the charge?
Sure. These are very specific solutions. We're not talking about sort of all-encompassing global solutions that get to the heart of of disinformation or competing narratives, but there are practical things that companies can look at. And one of the things that's picking up speed is active social media monitoring, which used to be kind of taboo. No one really wants to look over their shoulder of their staff. It's got Big Brother overtones, but the stakes are really high, and it's not just a new phenomenon with people who say like burn down the police headquarters or storm the Capitol or whatever. This has been going around, happening ever since social media started, and pre-social media. There are a lot of cases where you've had extremists within companies. You've had Al-Qaeda terrorists, white supremacists, jihadists, all sorts of other folks, Environmental Liberation Front, and who've done a lot of damage to their organizations. So to get in front of it, one of the possibilities, and a lot of companies have started to sell software that helps you monitor social media and what it does. It looks for phrases. It may even look for emotions. It'll look for potential target names. So your company's name, a person's name, any locations in the area or anyone you do business with. And it's starting to sell. The issue is that nobody really wants to say that they do this because it sounds, it makes people a little squeamish. And the companies that do it sort of add it on to other features that they have in their software suite. So it's like, oh yeah, by the way, we've got this, and like, oh yeah, I want that. But so people are using it, and I can't tell you any specific situations where it's identified somebody before they went out and committed some crime, but there are cases where companies have seen their own staff take political positions that ran counter to their conflict of interest policy, that ran contrary to what the brand stood for, and they were able to intervene before it got too bad. The downside of that is that, well, not the downside, the practical side is you've got to be careful when you do that. You've got to know what you're looking for. It's got to be fairly narrowly. You can't just throw out a fishing net and try to get everything your people say. You have to have the right policies. You have to have your legal department, your security department look these sorts of things. You have to know what kind of culture you want to have for your company. You've got to let people know that you're preferably that you're doing this. People who broke into the Capitol had their faces put on social media, and a lot of the companies I was mentioning earlier, and they almost all got fired. And at least two of them are suing their company for unlawful termination, saying they were there, but they didn't do anything. Yeah. And, that puts them in a tight situation. People are going to get sued. And so it's going to be very fact specific. People have the right, they have the right in Western societies to free speech. They don't have the right to incite crime. They don't have a right to commit or abet crime. They don't, such as trespassing. Mm-hmm. So where are you going to go? You got to look at, okay, are we going to punish someone's legal rights? You can go and say that it's perfectly fine to say that the vote was fraudulent, the U.S. election, shout it from the rooftops. But once you tell other people to break into somewhere, arguably you break in yourself, you steal something, you besmirch or desecrate the Capitol, then you've got a clearer case where, okay, that person can be dealt with, uh, you know, with disciplinary action, and in these cases, including firing. So there is a lot of value to this, but there's also the sense that, do you want to sort of walk down this path, into this legal path? And I actually wrote a story on this for the International Security Journal, and it just came out, as a matter of fact. And I was talking to an attorney about it who said, do you really want to know all the stuff that's going on with your staff? Because it can raise other issues. If somebody doesn't get a promotion and you've been following their social media and it said, oh yeah, I've been sick or whatever, or I'm pregnant, all of a sudden they don't get a job and they say, you've been watching my social media. This is discriminatory. In the US, it would be a violation of, I forget, title, whatever it is. Or the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, I mean. And sometimes it's better not to know. So you've got to balance it. I mean, yes, it's a solution. It's a pretty good solution. It's helped, but it's a tricky one. It's an entangling one. And it's like every other one. It's not a perfect solution.
Let me throw in an idea. I have a lot of ideas about it, but I really appreciate that it's almost like you're giving a mini masterclass on the opportunities and challenges that are involved in setting up corporate threat management programs. So I feel like, again, I'm very grateful that you're speaking with me, because it's going to be down the line very useful for people who tune in. So the challenge that I've always had is, look at what happened with the SolarWinds incident. The organizations that suffered from it got, I guess, disrupted, and they received this malicious code, and they were compromised through a third party. With Target breach many years ago, or what we like to think many years ago, really is not that distant memory, but they also got compromised through a third party. Here's what worries me. I have been in-house in a very large organization. It's a multinational organization. I used to work for Prudential Financial, which had, after 9/11, in 48 hours, they opened their checkbooks, and we had all security measures we could possibly wish, and they were installed in the matter of very few days to change our posture. Granted, what do you do about third parties? What do you do about organizations that just don't have the resources? And we talked a little bit about that at our ESRM discussion. I worry about that the challenges in the threats, even if they're mitigated to some degree in a large organization that has a good, deep pockets and can afford a threat management program, however proactive and well set up it may be, but they're still vulnerable to the third-party relationships with organizations that just they can't possibly have enough resources and financial, operational talent to be able to be at the level of the bigger organization, of the organization that's hiring them for whatever services that may be. And we also know very well that in those third-party organizations, we have a lot of their own security challenges. Okay, they are dealing with data protection, they're dealing with protection of their facilities, they may have also international presence and so on, albeit on a smaller scale. And the same goes for the breadth of their security functions, if they even have one, right? So what do you do? I grant to these big organizations that they have deep pockets and can do the threat management program and maybe do it very well. But that still leaves a larger proportion of organizations who I don't know if I trust enough in their capability to stand up the same level of protection within their organizations and on behalf of those that they have relationships with.
You're right to be wary of a lot of those smaller contractors who don't have a robust cybersecurity policy. So what would you do if you're, say, Target, and you have, I guess they have tens of thousands of partner contractors, maybe hundreds of thousands for all I know, So what do? You give them a checklist and say, check this off if you have these cyber protocols in place? Do you send an auditing team?
Mm.
That's not practical, right? So what they, and what's a perfectly logical thing to do, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, is okay, as a risk manager, you're saying, okay, what's the risk? Let's calculate the risk. How much will it cost to mitigate that risk, to negate the risk, to transfer the risk, blah, 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 blah. They may be saying, if not explicitly, implicitly, well, yes, there's a chance, we'll do the best we can, with our network and keeping stuff out and, and looking at incoming traffic. And we can't control all those folks. We can't control where somebody, a hacker, gets to, or where an insider gets to. And let's calculate how much it would cost to remedy this, like make it, do an audit, go there and make sure that all our contractors are compliant. That would cost tens of millions of dollars, right? So implicitly, they're making the judgment. It's like, okay, what's the worst can happen? Let's see what happened in the Target breach. How many millions of identities were exposed? Now, what was the bottom line to Target? I don't remember. Tens of millions of dollars of loss. Well, it may be that was less than it would cost to lock down the system. And I'm not saying that's what Target did. So don't, please don't conclude that. But as an organization, those are the kinds of things you're a risk manager, you're a risk advisor, really. And you never want to spend $2 to protect a $1 asset, right? And assuming the asset is not just, goods or cash, but it's also reputation and others intangibles. So you don't want to spend $2 to protect a $1 value. So what I imagine they're doing implicitly, if not explicitly, is saying it's not worth the expense. Let's reduce as much as we can. We'll take the loss. It's like shoplifting. You can stop shoplifting if you wanted to by really rigorously enforcing, having people stand and kind of peer over people, but that would scare most people away, and you would get lots of lawsuits for people who are security officers who are too aggressive, loss prevention agents who were intrusive. It's not worth it. Let's take 3% or 2% shrinkage, maybe up the price a little bit, and then we're back to even. Let's do enough that we're not being negligent, that we're taking care of the brand, that we won't raise the price too much for our consumers, and that we're not known as an easy target. So that's the kind of formulation that risk managers make. You just can't protect everything. You've got to make choices.
And it's good that you said that, because first of all, I wholeheartedly agree. I feel like we're past the point where we could shove all the policies and standards down the throats of smaller companies. I don't think it's realistic. I think that corner cutting has been the name of the game, both for the big companies and for the small companies. Okay. A lot of talk recently has been about zero trust after SolarWinds, and a lot of conversations, both interestingly, in the domain of data protection, but also in the domain that's referred to as physical security, right? Zero trust. Okay. I think that what you're leading to with your examples and with your suggestions is to prompt the larger organizations that, let's say, okay, we set up our threat management, we have a big robust team of people, we have practitioners, we have standards, we do a lot of useful things for our own organization. Here's an added layer, it seems to me. The added layer is to assume greater responsibility for third-party relationships. Not so much to completely take over control, because you can't, but for legal matters and whatever, just a simple contract will prevent you from doing that. Short of announced or unannounced audits, and the more frequently you do them, the better off, I suppose. But it's to become the guides and mentors and the coaches to those smaller organizations, to work together to assess what subsets of assets and valuations, to your point about, you don't want to protect a $1 asset with $2 worth of investment, and to figure out together with the third parties of what assets they're touching in the larger organizations that the organization wants to protect, and how to quantify and qualify protection measures across the board between the organization that's hiring the third party and on the part of that third party itself. So to make that collaboration very apparent, so that you not only receive services and support from that organization based on their contract, but you're also together working to mitigate the threats and to optimize, for lack of a better term, protection of assets. It seems to me that this is one of the ways in which the organization, to your point, can demonstrate that it's making good faith efforts in protection of their reputation, their assets, and their tangible and intangible, right? And at the same time, that they are paying closer attention and helping bring up the level of competence on the part of the third-party service providers. So I agree with everything you said. I just feel like we still have a lot of work to do, because, like you said before, the larger organizations, let's say the client organizations, they've only recently begun implementing more robust threat mitigation and reputation management controls themselves. So all of these programs are fairly new, right? So now they still have some time that it's going to take for them to embrace better collaboration with third-party organizations. The one challenge I feel that exists is this, creating a good comfort level between, let's say, a security organization that exists within the larger client organization, and any function that will be the point of contact, let's say, for the security function in the client, on the client side, right? It doesn't have to be a comparable security function, because that organization may just simply not have one, but they have to create or introduce a functional leader or a team of functional managers who will be the interface point, and who will be taking down that learning, that information from the client organization, and trying to embrace this, both as far as their culture is concerned, and as far as the protection of assets for that their organization is responsible for. Now, all of what we're discussing still seems complicated. Okay, it has a lot of complexity in it, and I don't want to minimize this, but I feel that the CSOs in large organizations, and CISOs as well, they have this new layer of responsibility for building these trust bridges, collaborative environments with third parties. Not just to say, oh, you're bound by contract, I'm going to hold you to these standards, I'm going to audit you once a year. That will simply not work, just like the same way it hasn't worked in the past. Okay, we still have more incidents today because of these legacy problems. So I feel that we'll be very well served if more and more senior leaders in client organizations start looking to the third parties and start building those bridges of trust.
And those are excellent points. The challenge that I see is that, can we get the funding to develop staff to build and sustain and develop those relationships with those third party, and even a system of project management to oversee that. If you have hundreds or thousands of contractors, and you're trying to build relationships with them, that's a tremendous task. That's that's not a one-person job That requires more of an investment in security, and that requires making the business case a very sort of clear-eyed business case that takes in all the factors and the costs. So yeah, it's I wish this stuff were easy, but if we're easy, then we'd have no problems, right?
Exactly. And I used to deal with the same challenges with third parties when I was in-house at Prudential. We actually built the first for the organization program on third-party management. And we worked, first of all, we built a multifunctional team at Prudential in-house. And then that team started becoming more and more involved with every third-party contract. Particularly, obviously, we started with the larger ones and more complicated ones, but then we started being asked by different functional groups to come in and just help validate whether they were building the right relationships. It's never easy. It's a complicated process. You could literally build a function just to look after that. But again, you have to kind of up the game. The way we're discussing with all the incidents and the challenges that we're facing. So let's now jump to scenarios for the future. So I kind of touched on what I believe might be a model for larger organizations to start working in a more collaborative way with their third parties. What scenarios are you seeing now that we talked about social media and its threat to organizations, and how even today we're struggling just as individuals to just process all this barrage of stuff that makes us agitated and so on. So like you see pockets of groups of employees that may cause internal threats to organizations. You see people that now attack brands. What scenarios stand out to you? What are you hearing from the community, from those you interact with, about what we should be expecting in the future?
Well, a lot of the talk is around, obviously we're still enmeshed in the crisis and the tragedy that's COVID. And you've got 90% or so of office and administrative workers who used to come in now working at home on networks, putting a tremendous strain on the infrastructure. And I must say the global internet and network infrastructure has held up very well. I think that's one of the success stories. I mean, you have some, I know that Zoom had some problems and Google's gone down, but really the considering the tremendous amount of stress on the infrastructure, it's really done well. However, you've got people who are sent home, and this is a little bit less these days because companies have time to adapt and to improve, but they're taking laptops out of mothballs, that of staff that never had worked at home before. They were buying new laptops, handing them out and say, go work at home, configure these. And they would do and because a lot of companies just weren't that ready, maybe they had a few days or a couple of weeks at most to really send people home for the pandemic. And if you have a large staff, you've got to mobilize it. A lot of these people didn't necessarily have the right kind of training, to identify malware and phishing attacks. To some extent, companies have done a pretty good job in sort of backfilling that because the COVID pandemic is, it's going on a year now, so that's plenty of time. But there's still basic things, basic sort of refresher things that aren't being done. Software patches, use of VPNs, and when you're in the privacy of your home, a lot of what I'm hearing is that people are sharing their computers. There's the families using it. Some of the sensitive stuff from work is showing up in the background on social media, or somebody's emailing confidential stuff to the wrong person because things are getting mixed up. The biggest thing, though, that I fear, and that a lot of the CSOs I've talked to fear, is the isolation, mental isolation of workers who really are kind of hitting a wall, the pandemic wall. And they may be hitting a wall emotionally. They may be hitting a wall economically or otherwise. And when you hit a wall economically, say a spouse has lost a job, or the money coming in just isn't enough to support your previous lifestyle. People will turn to either insider, sort of a fraud, theft, or are much more susceptible to be recruited by a nation state or a corporation to commit some sort of espionage, industrial espionage, pass over secrets, plans. I think when all of this is over, we're going to see a heck of a lot of fraud uncovered and a heck of a lot of uh, uh, corporate espionage. But the underlying problem here, I think, is a lot of people who are sort of disaffected, disassociated, and they're spending their time. This just brings us back to the world of social media. Their lives now are they're getting into falling into QAnon. They're falling they're kind of untethered from on the extreme side. They're coming untethered from reality. But really, what we're missing is that emotional connection with people, and I think that's the next big threat, and that's scary because that can manifest itself in many ways. It's we're seeing an increased amount of domestic violence attacks because the person who you're closest to when you're stressed is your loved one. So this is sort of the seed or the bud, or it's really more of a bud now because it's sprouting of what the big issues are going to be coming up and are already happening.
It's good that you mentioned it, because I just want to add a point that I just stumbled on recently. The World Economic Forum just released some additional, I guess, a thought piece, if you will, that puts, I guess, compromises to cybersecurity of organizations as one of the key threats to, like, for the foreseeable future. But I actually thought about it, and what occurs to me is the point is much deeper. It's not so much that the networks and the technology itself is a threat. It's the fact that we, be it in a pandemic or in normal times, whatever, if anyone could remember what that looks like. So it seems as though we, at the end of the day, the humans, with our decision-making ability or lack thereof, create these additional risks. And we serve as both the threat and a solution at the same time, it seems to me, because we will make poor choices about buying a crappy router and setting it up in our home. It's not the router itself. The router doesn't walk into our house. I go and, based on faulty information, buy the damn thing, and it doesn't work, or it works, but it's filtering information to a nation state, right?
And you set the password to pass123, of course.
Or that, or if I, or just don't change the password whatsoever. Use the default one, right? So, there's a lot of questions about design that we can have a completely separate conversation for another hour, right? But I feel like even today, I see like these large think tanks that are missing the critical point. It's not the technology itself that's presenting a threat. It's us. At the end of the day, it's how we make our choices, how we make our decisions. And your point about this scaling up susceptibility of people working from home and being emotionally under higher degree of duress, or falling into depression, or feeling this at least slightest uncertainty about the future, right? This is us being susceptible to compromise, to manipulation, and that, in addition, that actually leads to failures of technology, because we become the tool to help technology fail at our hands, but manipulated by a third party that has interest in compromising a network or compromising reputation of an organization, and so on. So I see a great worry. I share your worry about what will happen. Let's say we've been going at it for a year. We have a lot of political turmoil that is happening in parallel in different countries, not just the United States. And that's weighing on the regular citizens quite heavily in terms of, like you said, income, family stability, roof over their heads, access to the basic needs, and also to some degree maintaining at least a semblance of a normal lifestyle, or a lifestyle that one would want. And I think that that's the next wave, in my opinion, in the next couple of years that will hit. Either that's going to happen through organizations that shed a lot of people, like what happened here in Hong Kong. One of the airlines just fired 8,000 people. What are you going to do with that cadre? Where are they going to go? Do you think they're all going to go find employment? So, and they come from a fairly sensitive industry, right? So you have a lot of opportunity to manipulate people with knowledge of aircraft systems, engineering, and so on, right? And I feel that this is the wave that will beset us. I do want to add that I'm starting to see glimpses, not just, I don't think that it's viable yet, but I'm starting to see glimpses of the fact that education is, and primarily like primary education, like the school where my kids go to, and many others, starting to finally catch up to the fact that we have to start in the early years of delivering education to our kids, to start telling them these stories that we're all seeing as adults, to making them better prepared to address the challenges that they're going to inherit from us in the next 10, 15 years. I also see organizations like Heterodox Academy helping universities with de-escalation programs, helping blend different communities and come together and have civilized conversations without the feeling of the cancel culture. But those are just glimpses, and they're happening primarily in a few developed countries. We're not talking about that this happens all over the place, but it's still happening in a few places, and I hope that this will start proliferating further and further into majority of countries around the world. Yet to be seen how that's going to play out. I'm really hopeful about that. But for me, I want to say that we can jump into this last point about what do we tell to young and aspiring professionals. What I would like to tell those that are kind of just growing now and will be ready to enter the workforce, let's say in the next 5 to 7 years, is really to start looking and to be associated with systems, or for education systems to start delivering content and information to enhance critical thinking, enhance understanding of psychology, enhance understanding of what's factual and what's not, and start in the early years. And for those that are ready to enter the workforce, I think this diversity of understanding, just like what you demonstrated in our conversation, Mike, like looking at a variety of topics that are besetting different organizations and individuals, and not just focusing acutely on, let's say, one niche topic, right? Because you do need to have a much more global view of different threats that are possibly affecting organizations, individuals in different parts of the world, not just the US. So this would be kind of how I would start my conversation with the next group of young and aspiring practitioners. What is your message to those who are either just about to enter or entering our industry?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and you made some good points. First of all, when I try to encourage people to come into our industry, I say there's no real background that you need to have. There's no specific background. You don't necessarily need a law enforcement background. You don't need to have a military experience. Some of the aspects help. Having a business background helps, but having a sort of broad liberal arts / science background that has, you mentioned psychology, that has critical thinking. Any course that deals with critical thinking, could be history, could be economics, sociology, and the way the world works. So a nice combination of business, liberal arts, and sciences background, just to be able to we don't want in the box thinking, and I hate that term, but the way things at security, the way things have always been done in security is okay. There's sort of like the corporate way of looking at it, and there's maybe the law enforcement way of looking at it. We need to cut across that because the role of the security professional is much broader in a sense. And we've talked about this in the past and agree that the security, more than any of those things, it's psychology. It's the psychology of people. It's the psychology of organizations. It's group dynamics. It's people, what will set them off from when there's an opportunity and then risk reward. And it's communication. And there's just some very basic skills that could make you can learn investigations. You can learn, access control and asset management and intelligence analysis. But you need the basic skills of sort of, you have to like to think critically, because you don't accept pat solutions. And I know this is sort of running out of challenge for the next generation, but we really need, smart, broad thinkers who can bring in experience, thought, critical analysis, and be able to bring a lot of these things to bear for a holistic solution. And, the psychology side, the business side, the group dynamic side, all of these go into making an effective security. And the technology, you have to keep up the technology and know the cyber enough. You don't need to know the really technical stuff, but you have to have cyber works in the business and things we've been talking about today, and how it because it's inseparable. Security is security, and there's no not knowing cyber anymore. So that's what I would say.
Excellent points. I have nothing to add, and I only hope that you mentioned to me how sometimes it might be more useful to record these and make them a bit shorter. But I really hope that, like at least on my side, I care less about the ratings necessarily. I care more about that people can take our conversation, break it out into bits and pieces, and learn from, let's say, maybe 20% of it. Okay, at least that is far more useful. And I really appreciate that you stuck around and invested time into this broader conversation, because we need, I think, to have these broader discussions. Otherwise, we're going to be playing in our own sandboxes, our own niches, and we'll continue to talk about how tech is so great, but we'll be missing these huge points like what you brought up with social media, and how unfortunately it's ingrained now in our life and what we're doing. And your advice for young and aspiring practitioners is exactly what I was hoping for. Thank you for sharing that. Mike, I'm very grateful. Thanks very much for your time. Do you have any final thoughts? Something maybe I haven't asked you, or something that you wanted to share with the audience?
Well, gosh, I could go off in 1,000 different directions, but, take these conversations to heart, use them, to inform your decisions. And just, people appreciate you out there. You're sort of unheralded heroes for what you're doing. And there's a lot of reward in sort of taking the right steps. So I want to thank people out there who are actually, on the front lines every day and doing their best. So that's the only message I would leave with.
Mike Gips, thank you very much. And I'll see you in our next conversation, hopefully, be it on this platform or elsewhere. Thank you so much for your time and for your kind words.
It's been a real pleasure, Ilya, and you really challenged me. That's great. I like to be put on the spot. So it was a lot of fun.
That's wonderful. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.